The 1992 Los Angeles Uprising, the Cambodian genocide, Japanese American incarceration. What you know isn't always the full story. Our new podcast, Inheriting, about Asian American and Pacific Islander families where the past is personal.
Korean Americans, we call it 사이구.
Did you ever realize when you were a child that you became an orphan?
Camp was such a hard time. How do you think you got through it?
Listen to Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR network, wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And hey everyone, welcome to LAist and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And we are here to discuss our January 2025 book club pick, Sister Snake by Amanda Lee Koh, a modern take on the classic Chinese folktale Legend of the White Snake. Excited to get into this with all of you. As always, Books and Boba is supported in part by our listeners. So if you've been enjoying our podcast and want to become a bigger part of our book club, head on over to patreon.com/booksandboba, where as a Patreon supporter, you can gain access to our members-only Discord server, where you can chat with us and fellow members in real time, as well as monthly bonus podcasts, which we just recorded one for January, where we went over just what a chaotic few months we've had at the end of 2024 and beginning of 2025. So if you'd like to listen to our thoughts, head on over and check it out.
So Sister Snake was a Patreon pick, and I'm really glad that we picked it for our January book club pick because it is the year of the snake. And not only is it the year of the snake, it is the year of the green snake, the wood snake. So it's very fitting with like the green cover of the book and the whole snake themes.
Yeah, this was suggested by our Patreon member couple Jen, so thank you for the suggestion. And that's also another perk you can have as a member of the Books and Boba Patreon, is every quarter you can help us pick a book to read and discuss on the podcast. So yeah, that's a good point though. Happy New Year, everybody. We are recording this. This is our first episode of the Year of the Snake. Hopefully everyone had a great, if you celebrate, a great New Year. And if you don't, hopefully you enjoyed the peripheral commercialization of the holiday all around us.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get started then. As always, we do discuss our book club pick in its entirety for our discussion. So that means all plot points are on the table. So this is your standard spoiler warning if you have not finished the book yet and care about being spoiled. This is your cue to hit pause on this podcast, finish the book, and come back. And I promise you do want to finish this book. The last few chapters get wild. But yeah, with that said, let's get going. Rira, why don't you start us off, as always, with the book jacket description of Sister Snake.
Sisterhood is difficult for Sue and Emerald. Sue leads a sheltered, moneyed life as the picture-perfect wife of a conservative politician in Singapore. Emerald is a nihilistic sugar baby in New York, living from whim to whim and using her charms to make ends meet. But they share a secret. Once they were snakes, basking under a full moon in Tang Dynasty in China. 1,000 years later, their mysterious history is the only thing still binding them together. When Emerald experiences a violent encounter in Central Park and Sue boards the next flight to New York, the two reach a tenuous reconciliation for the first time in decades. Sue convinces Emerald to move to Singapore so she can keep an eye on her, but she soon begins to worry that Emerald's irrepressible behavior will out them both in a sparkling, affluent city where everything runs like clockwork and any deviation from the norm is automatically suspect. So like Marvin said, this is the reimagining of the Chinese folktale, The Legend of the White Snake. And also from like an author interview that I saw floating around, Amanda said it was partly inspired by the 1993 movie, The Green Snake. Which kind of makes sense because I heard that The Legend of the White Snake was with the White Snake being more of the protagonist.
Yeah. I mean, The Legend of the White Snake is one of, four of the, I guess they call it the four great folk tales of Chinese literature or of Chinese folklore. And, this is where I kind of, admit my own shame and I don't really know many of these folktales. The only other one that I know of besides Legend of the White Snake, and I only know of Legend of the White Snake because of there's been a couple of recent Netflix animated adaptations that they're not great, but they're kind of fun to watch because of the directions they take the story. The only other one I know of is The Cowherd and the Weaver Girl, which, funnily enough, I only know about because of Japanese anime, because it's a trope. Orihime and Hikoboshi, the star-crossed lovers that only meet once a year on the Tanabata Festival, is a favorite trope of like rom-com romance anime. So this is a very like Asian American thing where I'm coming at my own culture sideways, but it's always cool to see, diaspora writers and storytellers do their take on this story. And definitely the original story is essentially it's a romance between the White Snake and a scholar in the Tang Dynasty, right? So the story takes place in Shihu in Westlake in Hangzhou, China, which I've actually been to. It's a really beautiful place. And it's kind of like Disney's Little Mermaid, which the story is about love transcending species, right? So Suzhen and Xiaoqing, they have the same names in the original legend. Suzhen meets this scholar and they fall in love. And there's this Buddhist monk who tries to like break them apart because he doesn't think that man and snake can be together. And it's about the main love interest overcoming his own fear of the unknown to like say love is love and I love this snake spirit even though she's not human. And the funny thing is, so Xiaoqing, the green snake, her role differs depending on who's telling the story, and the vibe of the story has changed throughout the years too, right? The role of the monk who tries to break them apart. In some tellings, he's like a religious zealot who's like very like hardline conservative, and in other settings, he's like a monster hunter, right? He's just trying to like banish demons. Likewise, Xiaoqing, the green snake, in some stories, in the original telling, she's kind of just the side character who's just like, she's just there to make sure her sister is happy. She doesn't have really agency of her own. And like, basically, she's just there as like a support, like your best friend character in a rom-com, right? And in other retellings, she is like the jealous third love interest or like the secondary antagonist. So it's really interesting to see this version where the vibes of the green snake, the vibes of Xiaoqing / Emerald is the same. She's kind of more free-spirited, but also has like her own agency in the story, which is cool.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with the Legend of the White Snake. I've heard there was like a really popular 2019 live C-drama that came out that like kind of swept the internet by storm and people became like really obsessed with it. But
you can watch it on Viki if you want. It's streaming.
I'm honestly, it's not my jam, but good for you guys who are really into it. But I was really surprised that like this was based on a folktale and it decided to give both the white snake and the green snake like equal footing in terms of being a protagonist. And I thought it was really interesting that you could pretty much like Sue, who is the white snake, she lives in Singapore, and that just like defines her whole personality and her whole like mentality as like a snake who has transitioned into a human. And it's the same thing with Emerald, like, and how she is with New York City. So it was a really fascinating portrait of two cities that are very different from each other, but at the same time share the same problems of capitalism and migrant workers being kicked out and violence.
Yeah, I mean, the settings are really interesting, right? Because you can tell that Amanda Liko has, she was born and raised in Singapore. She has lived there and understands the nuances of that city, because what Singapore shows the world is not the whole story as this book goes through. I remember when I was in grad school, we took a trip to Singapore to, study what makes it tick, right? And so our professor was really gung-ho. Like, he was really bought into the Kool-Aid of like Singapore as like, the most efficient city in the world. That's really good for business. But I don't think he didn't understand nuances, because he booked us a hotel that turned out to be in like adjacent to the red light district of Singapore, which is not something you hear about a lot, right? But through that, like us as students were able to see kind of both sides of like, yeah, there is a red light district in Singapore where essentially sex workers fly in from neighboring Southeast Asian countries to work a few months to send money home, and then they either get deported or their visas expire. But like there's this like kind of shadow economy underneath the shining like clean economy that like makes the city run. And I think in a way, my professor, in being so gung-ho about how Singapore is awesome, showed us, his students, like the real kind of dual nature of like capitalism.
Yeah, and also conformity, because a lot of what is shown in Singapore in this book is, yeah, it's very efficient. Yeah, it's very clean, but there are very, very strict rules. And there is a strict hierarchy when it comes to power and how people are also treated in terms of like their privileges and like where they live, for example. Like government housing is like a thing in Singapore, but if you're rich, you get to actually live in a bungalow, and that might not be impressive from like an American point of view, because we're so used to seeing houses be houses and not just it be completely restricted for the 1%. But I mean, it's changing these days. But
I mean, Singapore's also a city state, like not a lot of square footage to have a lot of like single family
I digress.
homes. Yeah. And I'm curious because, the other setting is New York, and you are in some aspects you identify as a New Yorker as well. Like, what did you think about their portrayal of New York as this like dirty but free place? I
think it was pretty accurate. I'm sure New York has changed quite a bit since I last lived there, especially since like the level of like subway crimes and surveillance on like fare evasion, and like, I mean, that is a whole different topic. But New York to me has always been like this very electric city. It is dirty. There is like trash baking on the street. You see mice and rats, and of course there's like just like all different walks of people just in this one I don't want to say garbage heap of a city, but it really is like anybody who has dream or ambition seems to be in this city, but it like the city is also breaking them at the very same time. So it is a very like ruthless city. And I don't know, it's like a different type of jungle. It is an urban jungle with its own like ecosystem. And I thought it was really interesting that Emerald doesn't really have to come up with any backstory for like her history as a human, because Americans are so used to Hollywood and people like faking it till they make it. So it honestly doesn't matter.
Yeah, reinventing yourself, especially in a place like New York and in LA, right? Places where people go to where it's like a lot of transplants. Like it's easy to like reinvent yourself. I thought that was really cool too. I thought it was cool that, with Emerald and with Sue, we get like two flavors of like feminism or like female empowerment, right? Like on one hand, Emerald is all about like free love, free will, like kind of free spirited, like do what you want, don't let society constrain you. And Sue, on the other hand, is like the girl boss, gaslight, gatekeep flavor of feminism, which is like, I can play with the boys, right? And I kind of feel like if Sue was the one that ended up in New York, she would be in those like one of those brownstones, Gilded Age like mansions. Like she would still be like in that finance bro world of New York that we kind of glimpsed in the first chapter with Emerald's like douchey date.
I feel like Sue would not survive a week in New York City, especially like the outer boroughs. But let's say like Manhattan. I do not think that she'll be able to survive a week, because we learn that Sue, has like this obsession with passing, obsession with safety, which is what Singapore like provides in terms of like infrastructure and culture, because they're like a city state that runs on, on a very like collective mindset of like, hey, the people on the top will decide what will be safe, what will be what are the rules, and then if you just follow them, you're fine. But of course, it's not as simple as that. But like to her, she's like, oh, when I was a snake, and trigger warning for the people who have not read this book, there is like a graphic rape scene, snake rape scene, but still like very uncomfortable to read. But she had this like very violent sexual assault that happened to her as a snake, and that has like affected her for her entire life. And she's like, I crave safety. Being an animal with animalistic instincts, like it's just not a safe place. And look at the humans, they look so sophisticated, they have language, they're able to like coexist peacefully. So like she has this very like picture perfect view on humanity. And I thought it was very interesting that Singapore is the place that she decided to like settle for like the past couple decades.
I mean, here's the thing that I would push back. Maybe she wouldn't survive in Manhattan, but if she was in New York, she would probably be upstate, right? She would be in one of those like Scarsdale, Westchester, like mansions, McMansions with like a lawyer, or like she would probably be like either a trad wife or like a MAGA wife, right? Like that would be
I'm just
where
saying
her
she does not
is.
have she does not have the grit
if you look
to
at
be a
her,
New Yorker.
If you look at her, well, I mean, do you need grit when you have money? And that's the thing. She has money and privilege, right? And she has really ensconced herself in that world. And she has this ability throughout the ages. And I think that's interesting because this is a modern retelling, but it's also kind of like it reminded me of like Anne Rice's stories, which is like, these are stories about immortal beings who live through the ages. And we kind of see how they survive. And like in every age, Sue finds the most conservative kind of way to find safety. It's always in the presence of power and men, right? In Victorian England, she agrees to become a concubine to a Marquis, right? And in China, like she finds safety in Confucianism, which is also like ensconced in patriarchy and gender roles. So, I feel like in Emerald's world, she would not survive, but she doesn't live in Emerald's world. She lives in her own world where money and power is, even when she comes to New York to find Emerald in the middle of the book, she lives in a different world. She lives in like the Waldorf Astoria, Ritz-Carlton, like where money provides safety.
Yeah. But I just think about like how, like essentially like she is like a victim of sexual assault, and, there is like this constant fear of her being assaulted. And I don't know, like New York City, like not saying that it's like a dangerous city, because I feel like all cities are dangerous to their own degree. But like walking down the street alone at night can heighten that sort of like fear. So I just like don't see Sue like voluntarily living in New York. Like it just shows their personalities, right?
Yeah,
like Emerald definitely belongs as like an artsy fartsy New Yorker, and then you have Sue, who is very like button up conservative.
Yeah, she'd be in the finance class. Yeah, Wall Street. She wouldn't be walking on the street. She'd be like in the car.
It'll be like Succession.
Yeah, exactly. And back to like another thing that kind of made it like reminded me of like Anne Rice stories. It's like the way that Amanda, fleshed out what a snake spirit is. They're kind of like vampires, right? They're kind of
Yeah, I definitely got like the Anne Rice vibes. I was like, this is Interview with a Vampire with like a queer and lesbian slant to it.
I mean, Anne Rice herself, her books are very homoerotic too, right? So it's like not outside of like that inspiration. And we see the bonds of these sisters through the ages. And, even when they don't agree with how one should live as a woman, they still like care and take care of each other, right? Like we learned that Sue's been going around murdering people that hurt Emerald throughout the years. Because, I mean, one thing that's really like reminded me of, I think something you said, Rira, and something that we've seen a lot in like memes. It's like time travel is bad for like marginalized people, women, people of color, right? And they have to live through like 400 years of being women in cultures that don't value women, right? They have to find ways to survive. And Emerald is able to find her footing in the modern world, where it's more because of the advancement of like civil rights, or even like, queer culture, she's able to find her people. But then, in those early years, like even in the modern world, Sue still has to go and kind of protect her from all the things that might harm her. And I thought that was an interesting part of their relationship, especially because the way that the book is set up, like you definitely empathize with Emerald as like, I think as Americans who value freedom, like we innately respond better to her, and we innately have like a very visceral reaction to the type of person Sue is, which is essentially like a boomer, right? Like someone who like has power, has privilege, doesn't use it to help people, and like doesn't speak up for herself, right? Like a lot of her chapters is her recognizing that things are seem a little fucked up, things are like not right, but not wanting to speak up because she doesn't want to risk her safety. And it's, you know, it's definitely like that type of conservatism we see from a lot of like, let's say, older generation immigrants, Asian Americans.
Yeah, I think there's like a quote in the book, because the thing is like through the centuries, through the decades, Sue has gone through like a string of husbands, and Emerald kind of has like this insult to her in the beginning of the book, being like, "Oh, you're like a Stepford wife with like a string of like bureaucratic husbands," and it just like it is just very interesting how like you said, like how they represent like two different ends of like feminism, you know, because like on the other hand, like Sue makes her own money, like she has financial independence, like she can really, you know, she doesn't need a husband.
Yeah,
but at the same time, like she quote unquote likes being spoken for, she likes being invisible, and she likes the false security of having a man tell her what to do and her being like, I am a good wife, I am a good person as long as I do whatever my husband wishes. And it's like, I think you need to reevaluate yourself, girl.
So I read a couple reviews, and I'm not going to belabor this one because I don't feel like I'm in the best position to talk about this experience, but like there is sort of like a trans allegory to the sister stories, right? Like they are trying to pass as women, but they weren't born as women, right? And they also represent two sides of like, you know, being yourself, like fuck what society says, like you have to be yourself, and that's important, to like, I need to pass in order to survive. I can't stand out. People can never know who I truly am. That is a really interesting tension too.
Yeah. And, you know, even though Sue is my lesser favorite sister of the two, like she is very much like a compelling character, and I do feel like pretty bad for her because of her traumatic past and like her obsession to, you know, passing as a woman, passing as a perfect woman, so she has the safety. And, you know, it reminded me like of just like Asian Americans who want to assimilate so bad so that they can be seen as like non-threatening to like the supreme white people on top. So it's like great.
I mean, you can apply that allegory to a lot of different things. Any situation where you have to suppress who you are in order to find safety and success, if not success, at least safety in the world, right? To not ruffle any feathers. Definitely something that a lot of any marginalized person can relate to. And yeah, I did find myself like, you know, Sue is like a compelling girl boss, right? She can do like, she is very like, when she decides to show her power, she is terrifying, right? But at the same time, she uses that power in Holly. I'm still not over her murdering Bartok, like that.
Yeah. I mean, like the truth is she murdered like plenty of men throughout her long life.
Yeah, you'd think that it's Emerald being like the free spirited one, being like, I'm gonna abuse my power, I'm gonna like just go murder. But Emerald's actually the one that's always trying to preserve life, right? Like she'll take your chi, but only enough to make you drowsy. Like because I do like the implementation of Chinese folklore, in this case like Xinsha, like Taoist, like cultivation fantasy, where it's like it's all about internal chi and meditation and self-actualization being the key to unlocking immortality and power. And the fact that like, yeah, they're not like vampires. Well, I guess vampires kind of the same way, right? Blood regenerates, your chi regenerates. So as long as you don't drain them of everything they survive. So again, the vampire allegory does translate here as well. But yeah, it's Emerald who's always like, I don't want to kill people, like, but I do need your life to live. Whereas Sue, like, yeah, Sue's body count's pretty high in this book.
Yeah, and also like Sue really hates her snake snake traits. Like she refuses to molt her skin for like 8 years. She's vegan, which is hilarious to me because I'm like, snakes aren't even vegan. Like, what are you trying to do, lady? And she represses all of her animalistic like natural traits, and she's just like struggling so much. Whereas like with Emerald, she just seems to shapeshift between snake and human like so fluidly, so effortlessly. And I do love how it's written on the page because I mean, how do you write like like snake monsters and like make them human and also like unearthly at the same time? Because it's not like separate scenes, you know, it's like all in the same page where you just have like Emerald shifting from one thing to another. Sometimes like she is like half snake, half human in like one shot, and I'm like, okay, this is very interesting in terms of like monster lore.
I did learn a lot about snake biology by reading this book. Like, I didn't know that they smell with their tongues. I didn't know that they can reproduce asexually. It was, you know, Amanda did a good job mixing in a good biology lesson in addition to her like sexy snake spirit story.
Yeah. And also you find out that Sue, the white snake, has more powerful venom than Emerald. Like her breed of snake actually cannibalizes other snakes. And I'm like, dang, you have like so much badass power in you, but you don't use it. Yeah.
She's like the apex predator of the snake world, whereas Emerald is just like a regular variety viper.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was cool. And I also love that, you know, they acknowledge that there's other spirits in the world too. And, you know, there's like a monkey spirit that Emerald shacked up with for a few years.
Like there's a situationship. Like, yeah, I thought that was hilarious too. There
was a really funny exchange between Emerald and Bart, her best friend, who's like, you know, like a gay, or is he bi? He's a queer artist. Like, is it performance art or pop art? He's a pop art, right?
I think he's a painter.
Yeah.
But I was just like, okay, the quote unquote queer, like the queer best friend, the gay best friend. Okay, like the physical manifestation of the stereotype. But I also don't fucking care. He's like, he was so funny.
He was fun. And he was like really excited to learn about her. Like, she reveals her true nature to him after she gets shot by the NYPD in the first chapter. And he's like, well, how do I become immortal like you? Like, that'd be awesome. And she's like, well, in like, I guess the spiritual world, being human is the end goal. Like, everything wants to be human. I think that's kind of like an aspect of like Xinxia literature. And like, I had the same thought as Barb. Was like, that's kind of a bum deal, right? Like, why?
Yeah. What was the line that he said? He was like, "Oh, the self actualization of goop or whatever," because like there's like a mantra that the snakes have to.
Yeah, it's like, my body is emptiness. Emptiness is my body, which is, you know.
Yeah, they kind of have to like meditate on that for what, like 800 years.
800 years, yeah.
It reminds me of like there's a Korean folktale about like the first women, I guess, and it was a bear who, you know, had to endure 100 years of just eating garlic and like pepper, I think. And it's just like, yeah, you have to endure this for 100 years and then you can become human. So yeah, like the whole like human being the end goal. It is kind of a bummer from like a modern day standpoint.
As a human, I mean, it's not worth it.
I'm tired of being a human. Yeah. which is another thing that is a theme in this book, because like there are times when Emerald is like, oh my goodness, like I didn't even want to be human. I said I would like try it once. I would try anything once. I initiated this process to make us human because my sister really was desperate to be a human, and I just want to be where she is. So we get these passages where Emerald is talking about like how she felt so free as a snake. Like the only thing she has to worry about was like eating, hunting, and sleeping. And she's like, it's so simple. You could just exist without any of like the demands that human society demands out of you, like money and status. And she's just like, it's so tiring. And I'm like, girl, I feel you. I too wish I could just be an animal and not worry about paying bills and the fall of capitalism. Like
Sue was the one who was like, I want to be where the people are, right? She's like longing for walking around on her feet. Like she was the Little Mermaid in this story. She was Ariel. I did find it interesting that in this world, in this modern story based on the legend seems to have also taken place, because when they first emerge as humans, they do meet and shack up with a scholar. And but instead of this being a love story, it becomes like a kind of a love triangle story where Sue becomes jealous of Emerald's kind of free-spiritedness, charming the scholar, and kind of kicks her out, which is like, I think that's when her like girl boss nature started to unlock, right? Like she's not here for all women, even her own sister, right? But that was also the chapter that gave us like, so the prose in this story is it's very poppy, right? I think that's most apparent in Emerald's chapters, as well as like when she's interacting with Bart. But I really love the chapter titles, which is just kind of a line taken
those are
the story.
Great.
And like,
which one was your favorite?
My favorite is the one that takes place in the chapter where they like talk about their love triangle with the scholar, and they get in a fight, and Emerald says, well, his erections are as lackluster as his poems, which like is that's a real sick burn. That's a real good burn. I
think my favorite was, humans are scum, but I can make you come.
The Emerald ones are the best. Yeah. I mean, the book starts off strong, right? The first chapter is titled Thoughty Bayesians Are in High Demand, which kind of just sets the tone of what you're in for, at least with Emerald's chapters.
I mean, like immediately when you think of like snake, like woman, it's like, oh, okay, like seductive Asian dragon lady or whatever. And I do love how Emerald has like wielded that as a weapon. She's like, yeah, I am going to use what I have to attract the shitty white men who have yellow fever, and I am not even going to kill them. I'm going to like just use them to get like my food, and that's it. Of course, Giovanni was another beast. I was like, yeah, he deserves to die.
This is like, I thought this was such a good follow-up to our last book, because like, again, we're in a story where men just suck, except for Bart. Like most of the men in this story suck ass. And I feel like in a lot of ways, a lot of what Sue's chapter, what she's putting up with, is in direct conversation with like Kim Ji-young, born 1982, right? Especially since she has to deal with like an unexpected pregnancy, as well as like all the things that like, she has no autonomy over her body, even as like a snake spirit, right? Because, I mean, again, trigger warning, I guess, she ends up having a forced abortion, right? Because her husband found out who she is. Yeah.
That was so nightmarish. I, like, quite honestly, the most horrific parts of the book was not like when Emerald or Sue turned into snake monsters and like graphically gored on terrible human beings. I'm like, no, that's fine. Like,
oh, that's the best part. Yeah.
I was like, I'm not really a gore person, but I'm like, chow down. Yeah, it's fine. It was like the really menacing parts where they're trying to take away women's bodily autonomy, and them doing like all sorts of violations. And like the one where she has the forced abortion while she is asleep, and she didn't give consent to it, and her partner took that choice away. I was like, this is my worst nightmare. Like, oh my fucking God.
Yeah. Let's talk about Paul, her husband, who I think deserved a worse fate than what he eventually got in the book. But he's, he is the up and coming Minister of Education in Singapore. She is the person that she is attached to as a husband to provide safety and privilege. And, he himself comes from like a underprivileged background. He's plucked from obscurity by the party to, as part of their like scholarship program, and is in line to become like chief minister, right? Essentially like president of Singapore. And I found it really like, again, like in conversation with Kim Ji-young, which is like on paper, like from like an outsider's view, he's doing all the right things, right? It's not until we go into like his point of view, his internal monologue later in the book that we realize where all this is coming from. But like in the beginning of the book, he seems to be like, oh, he loves her for who she is. He's not forcing her to do anything. He's like, cool with not having kids. Like he just wants like on paper, like a perfect, doing all the right things, similar to like Kim Ji-young's husband. But like, you dig a little deeper and you kind of scratch at it. You find like the patriarchy within, right? And that's...
I was like, all men do is lie. Like this man, he doesn't force Sue to be like the perfect trad wife, but like that's his kink, right? That's what he loves about her. I mean, what he loves about her is like her beauty, because that's what catches his attention, but also like her grace, her demureness, and it extends to her, wanting to please him, not being too loud with her opinions, and being very subservient to him. So like I don't know, like when like it he's one of those people who's like, I'm one of the good guys. And it's like, yeah, but you're one of the good guys who would totally just make your wife take care of the kid and like do all of the housework and not help out at all. Like, because you just think that that is like all a woman is good for. Like, it was just like weird to me. And also how he would be like, I work so hard all day and all you do is go shopping. There's like a little bit of resentment there. And I'm like, dude, that's her own money. Like who cares what she spends her money on? And it's not like she doesn't do, like, she just lounges around. She has like shareholder meetings and like bank meetings and whatnot.
But it doesn't fall into his conception of what his wife should be, because she's gone out of her way to show him what he wants to see. And I think that the cracks start to form in his facade, and it's not a very good facade. Like, it's crumbles real easily, but like in the middle of the book where they're at this gala or something, and I guess we find out what he's been dealing with at work, which is a trans girl is being, I guess, like forced to dress in a boy's uniform and use the boys' restroom, and it's become a big deal. And the way that he is just unwilling to entertain the possibility that there is such a thing as gender dysphoria, and like that trans people are people, right? Like, he's very much like, this is what's going to cause society to collapse. And that's when I'm just like, it's not going to cause society to collapse. And also what does this have to do with education? Absolutely nothing. It's just a uniform, but of course it's never just a uniform, as we've seen from our own politics here in America and how we treat trans people. But it definitely feels more oppressive when you're reading it, like, as an American, reading those Singaporean scenes. However, there is a quote in the book that talks about how, let me pull it up. Liberal Americans have a penchant for magnifying authoritarian quirks without taking a good hard look at the gutted state of populist democracy in their own backyard. And I'm like, it feels more oppressive. It feels like, oh man, like at least here in America, we do have trans students who can dress however they want. And it's like, but we are also violating their rights as human beings here in America. So really. It's the same, right? They can do what they want as long as they don't do it in front of you, which is kind of how the Singaporean government works as well, because we do find that there is like kind of like not a queer underground, but there is a more, I want to say, authentic side to Singapore where kind of where the artist and was able to find this part because this is where she thrives, right? This is where we kind of learn the story of of Tick, right? Sue's bodyguard, who is a Malaysian woman in the armed forces, who, also has to deal with masking her own sexuality while on the job. But like Emerald's able to find like this place that she vibes with in Singapore, right? And she has again, really great chapter quote here, which is like, if she hadn't found this place, she would have been 100% prepared to go full death metal on Singapore, right? And when she brings up this place to Paul, he's like, oh, that place? What a dump. We're getting rid of it soon.
Yeah, we're getting rid of it soon. Oh, so full of delinquents and illegal immigrants and blah, 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 blah.
And
you should have gone to
free-form graffiti without approval from the government.
Oh my God. I totally laughed at that because, as Americans, we're so used to seeing graffiti anywhere, right? And
yeah,
especially here in LA, graffiti is, it is like an art form that is used for protests. And it's just like, what do you mean you need permission from the government to do graffiti? That's insane.
But sometimes in America, we also have approved aesthetic street art in our shopping centers, right?
Yeah, but I did love the scenes where Emerald is going to all these little pockets of Singapore that we don't really see in Crazy Rich Asians, for example. And it's, it feels more down to earth, more approachable. It's like, oh, there's this mom and pop shop that's been around for 100 years serving the same dish. There are people who are struggling to make a living. There are people who, create art, or people who have to hide their sexuality, but they're still living life the best as they can,
Yeah.
So it's there's something very sterile about Singapore outside of these little pockets, and these pockets feel, messy and just lived in, So I really like those scenes with Tick and Emerald.
Yeah. And, these are also scenes with people that are of the ethnicities that are more oppressed in Singapore, right? Singapore definitely has a hierarchy. You have Chinese on the top with Desi Indians, and then on the bottom you have Malay, Indonesian, Southeast Asians, right? And you definitely see the stratification based on who Emerald hangs out with and who Sue hangs out with.
Yeah, which makes Paul even more despicable in my opinion, because I'm you're not even giving these people a chance. You already see them as scum.
Yeah.
And yeah,
he's bought into the Kool-Aid that if you wanted to make better of yourself, you would have done it. The only reason you're poor is because you're lazy and not chosen, right? He's fully bought into the fact that because he was chosen, he deserves the power, and he wants to protect that, right? He's definitely in the very toxic capitalist mindset of
I pulled myself through with my bootstraps. I am an exceptionalism person. It's just bleh. You suck, Paul, and you really deserve to have your head be torn off by a snake sister, but
it didn't happen.
You got a very humanized ending.
What did you think about the last few chapters escalate crazy, right? Sue, throughout the book, has been the tension has been building, right? Her coming to terms with her pregnancy, wanting to, going through the motions of do I want to keep it? Do I want to get rid of it? And ultimately deciding, no, I want to keep this. And I want to seeing Emerald again. I want to be more my authentic self. She kind of starts on that path, unfortunately, because of her actions up to that point, including murdering Emerald's best friend. It kind of throws all that into jeopardy. We have that, if we look at this as a rom-com, like setup. We have the third act breakup where Emerald finds out that Sue killed her best friend, and they, decide to like call it quits for now, right? Or for good. And Emerald gets in trouble. Sue saves her and ends up like kind of getting bitten by Emerald and decides to drive home or drive away while like under the influence of Emerald's poison, which is a questionable decision, but ends up, getting into a car accident. And this is after Paul finds out that she has like a snake baby inside of her, right? Because the embryo, the fetus inside of her is not a human fetus. It's a snake fetus, right? Decides it's for her own good and to get rid of it without her consent, and like talks his friend into like calling in a favor, right? And this puts Sue over the edge, and she goes on essentially a third act murder spree, which I found to be pretty awesome. Like,
yeah, it's very cathartic, especially as like a woman living under patriarchy and misogyny. It was like, yeah, let's go tear these babies up, like tear these man babies up. They freaking deserve it.
And like the fact that he's not even there when she wakes up, because I think in subconscious he knows he fucked up, but he decides, no, I need to go make this speech in Parliament to address this trans issue, right? They don't even call it the trans issue; they call it the uniform issue, right? Yeah. And then she goes to. I love that the climax of this story is her going into the Singapore House of Parliament and just fucking things up, like just like tearing down, like maybe not tearing down the system, but really like essentially decapitating those in power, right?
Oh yeah. Like I said, very, very cathartic. But I do not like how Paul seemed like he was humanized, because he was like, I still love you. Like, we could still start over. I don't care that you're a snake monster. And I'm like, yeah, but you still took her bodily autonomy. You still expect her to like bend to all of your whims. I mean, you were upset at her because she didn't have dinner ready on time. Just one time, because she went out with her sister. Yeah. And you were like mad because you didn't get like the breakfast that you wanted. I'm like, do you really love her? I don't think so.
I want to say her, like, Sue was robbed of like a righteous kill, right? Like she was robbed because Paul ends up getting shot by, what's his name, Riz? Like his political rival, who is like the defense minister, who like has a gun, which is, wild because there's no guns in Singapore, supposedly. And he dies saving her from the gunshot, which, kind of a letdown, if I'm honest.
Very much a letdown. Yeah. I don't know. Just even in the end, like,
I guess it does go with the original source material, where at the end, the love interest decides that her being a snake monster is not a deal breaker. I just feel like same with Sue, like at this point, she's kind of, they've accumulated so much bad karma that his like death by sacrifice seems like a mercy, right? It seems like
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean the end, like how did you feel about the ending when they decide to go back to Hangzhou as snakes and try to live out their lives like that?
I didn't mind it. I know some people weren't a big fan of like the, after like the bombastic, last few chapters featuring a lot of death, a lot of mayhem. The final epilogue is kind of chill, right? They go back to Hangzhou, and Emerald kind of decides to like finish her training, right? Become a better version of herself, while Sue kind of rests and overcomes her mental trauma. And I kind of like that the end of the story is kind of a life goes on type of thing, where Emerald finds a new way to view her immortality and accepts it more for like something that she wants. I feel like that was a good end of arc for her, right? And the fact that like it's open-ended, nothing, like they just live on as snakes, it's fitting for these two women who really do have to go on living for the rest of eternity, right? Yeah, I didn't mind it. I think it was I thought it was a good kind of epilogue, kind of saying that, yeah, they'll be fine. Sue and Emerald, they'll be fine. They'll live on. Because I also feel like all the arcs on Singapore were closed in a satisfying way. So I didn't feel like I wanted to go back and like find out what happened to the rest. Although it is interesting, like this did happen in the real world. It'd be huge news, right? Snake monster destroys the government of Singapore.
I'm sure they'll find a way to spin it to make it sound logical.
Yeah.
I really did like the fact that because like throughout the book, like Emerald talks about how it was so much easier being snakes. It was so much easier being sisters. All of their problems began, all of the rifts began in their relationship once they became human. They would. Sue would like throw her under the bus for a man, or like, like Emerald will make reckless choices, and Sue would be like, "I have to go clean up your messes." It was a very fraught and, albeit like toxic relationship. Toxic because they're both snakes, both vipers. But throughout the entire book, she's just like, I want simplicity again. I want to be a snake again. And then at the end of the book, when, they have committed to a life of, okay, we're going to be snakes now for the rest of our life. We don't need to turn into humans. The thing that gets her is the tanghulu. And she's like, oh, man, sugar, I need it. And she becomes human, like, without even realizing it when she follows the scent of the tanghulu. And then the tanghulu seller is like, here, you can have some of this. And like in at the end of the book, it seems like she has like this new appreciation for human beings and for being human. And she realizes like, yeah, like I lived recklessly as a human. Like I lived life on the edge and had questionable decisions, but that was part of being alive. And I loved being alive. And being a human made me, have more adventures, more choices. So, like, I thought it was a very, like, good conclusion to her arc. With Sue, I don't know. She went through a lot, and, she is recuperating. But it sounded like she kind of lost meaning in her life. And I don't really know if she's going to survive. I mean, she's immortal, so she can't die. But I'm also like,
the thing is, like, the thing that did endure is their bond as sisters. And similarly, when they first met, she was also in a similar state of despair, right? She had just gotten, assaulted by this like, this gang of snakes. Male snakes, and like, very violently and very maliciously, right? The prose, Amanda is very specific to write that this was not a normal mating exchange. This was like intentional. They wanted to break her, right? And she was able to find, like, Emerald was able to find her and nurse her back to health. And I kind of feel like we're kind of full circle, right? We're back at the beginning of the relationship where Sue's in a state of, utter despair, and Emerald is there for her, right? And the final line being the scent of jasmine in the air kind of leaves you on the hopeful note that the bond's still there. Like her presence is still a calming thing for Emerald. And I thought that I think that's a hopeful way to end.
A part of me just wishes that Emerald like abandoned Sue because because like Emerald has made Sue like her entire life, like she became a human because of her. She's like always been like, she always want like Sue to kind of be proud of her, and she always wants to be by her side. So she, tries to like compromise on some of her values. And I'm just like, if you make someone the center of your world and have them just like have so much influence on your life, I don't know. It's just very toxic, I think there's a passage where Bartuk is telling her like, yeah, you're kind of like a lapdog chaser when it comes to your sister, and it's weird. And I'm like, yeah, toxic family dynamics and toxic girl friendships. Sometimes some relationships have to just end. And it can be both of your faults or neither of your faults, but like sometimes time takes a toll, and sometimes things cannot be taken back. So I'm like, I don't know about this relationship. Maybe they should just end it.
I choose to see this as a continuation of like the legend, right? The legend is they're sisters, and for better or worse, they're the only other person of their essentially species at this point, right? The only other person that's the same type of person as they are. And so I don't know. I see your point though, but also she did try to abandon her a couple times throughout the ages, and they always end up back together. And it's always a
bad relationship. It's a mess. It's a hot mess.
Yeah.
And I do thought it would I did think it was interesting when they did meet other animal spirits who like kind of made the same deal to be humans, because they too are trying to pass, and they don't like it when other animal spirits who are in the same situation as them like approaches them, and they're just like, shh.
Unless you're a monkey spirit, which is like cool.
Unless you're
cool
a monkey
beans.
spirit, but like most of the animal spirits are like, I am trying my best to just be a human, and I'm having you throw off my vibe, so please go away.
I mean, I think that's probably a good like way to show that no matter where you are, society does not like things that are different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes the people you share commonalities with, they'll push you away for those same commonalities.
Kinfolk
it's like
kinfolk, right?
yeah. It's like when like say if you're like the only Asian kid in school and another Asian kid transfers to your school and they immediately want to like hang out with you, and you're just like, why are you hanging out with me? Is it because I'm Asian? It's not because I'm like someone that you actually like, and this seems like very artificial. So no, let's not. Yeah,
I feel like that's how I am at conferences though. Like I find the other Asian one and go, hey, these people, right? What's up with these people?
Yeah, whenever I go to like outside of like the Asian American bubble, I'm always looking around being like, who are the minorities in this room? Who are the ones that I can trust? Who are the ones who are like, who are going to help me get out if there's a situation? But
at the same time, to your point, sometimes you find like a person that you want. You say, okay, here we have something in common, we can relate, and you realize they're the type of person who loves proximity to whiteness, proximity to power, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, we don't vibe at all. This is actually bad vibes. I need to get out of here.
Yeah, I think it's a very complex book that juggles a lot of things and switches from topic to topic very seamlessly. Like, living under patriarchy and conformity, and how to like be queer but be authentic to yourself. And also like I love this allegory of being trans, like transitioning, and what does it mean to pass, and what do we lose in the pursuit of trying to pass. So very, very interesting book.
Yeah, I agree. Like all that, but also really fun to read. Like I breezed through this book. Like it's written in such a fun kind of poppy way. Which was definitely needed given like all the heavier topics that Amanda brings up throughout the story. So yeah, had a great time reading this book. Hopefully you all had as well. Any last thoughts before we call it for our book club discussion?
My favorite character aside from Emerald was definitely Tick. And I totally shipped them together until Ploy came into the picture, and I was like, no. Ploy and Tick are endgame.
They're the OTP, right?
They're the OTP. Cannot separate those together. I love the descriptions of like each person having their unique chi taste, and that gives away like what kind of person they are.
That's true.
And
That's
some
true.
of the people that gets munched on, they're not great food either. They're not great people. are not great sustenance either.
They're like
so I thought that was
stale
pretty
or
funny.
rancid or sour.
Or gamey.
Yeah. Whereas like I think, when Emerald sampled Tick's cheese, she's like, oh, it's cherry cola with like cloves.
It's like, oh, you're a
was it?
good person. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really cool way to like play with the idea of eating someone's chi. It's like, oh, they have different vintages, different flavors. Like here's notes of floral scent or whatever.
Notes of floral. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess with that'll do it for our discussion of Sister Snake by Amanda Lee Coe, our January 2025 book club pick. Thank you all for listening. And if you have any thoughts on our discussion or on the book itself, please let us know either on Goodreads or if you are a Patreon supporter on our Discord. As always, we'll hear your thoughts about our books whenever possible. Okay, before we go, we do want to announce our February book club pick, which is it's my turn to pick a book. So for this month, we will be reading The Verifiers by Jane Peck. It seems like a mix of genres, but it is like a mystery thriller about a Chinese American woman who gets recruited to be a investigator for an online dating detective agency in New York. And while working a case, gets drawn into like a vast conspiracy. So lots of cool, keywords. Love the fact that it's a mystery around the world of online dating, which I'm very interested in checking out.
If you guys are a big fan of the catfishing show, I feel like this will be your jam as well.
Yeah. So looking forward to reading this with all of you. We will be, as always, reading together on Discord over the month. So check in on the discussion channel to find our reading schedule. But yeah, with that'll do it for this episode of Books and Boba. Thank you so much for listening to our discussion, again, of Sister Snake by Amanda Lee Coe. And we will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Ri Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey Brian, did you go to Saturday school as a kid?
I sure did. Did you?
Totally.
Well, at our podcast, Saturday School, we don't teach a language, but we pass along the culture that we do know.
And that's Asian American pop culture.
Ada's a journalist, and I'm a professor and film festival programmer.
We've watched a lot of great Asian American movies, and we want you to watch them too. Come listen to us as we look back at the pioneering films that have led us to today.